Welcome to みんなのキリスト教広場ラジオ。大学生クリスチャンサークルStudentインパクトのスタッフ、クリスチャンになって6年のペーペーのまゆとドイル先生です。このラジオはキリスト教に魅了されてきた私たちがキリスト教の奥深さを全然触れてこなかったっていう人でも分かるように話し尽くしていこうという番組です。はい、このラジオで毎回いつもゲストの方をお迎えしているんですが、今回の、シリーズはですね、津田塾大学と東京外国語大学で先生をされているドイル先生をお迎えしています。4つのエピソードで話していこうと思ってるんですけど、今回2回目ですね。前回はコミュニケーションについて話したんですけど、今回はコミュニケーションの結果生じる、関係ですよね、人間関係についてもう少し話していきたいと思っています。はい、じゃあ早速ね、今回の内容にも入っていっちゃおうかなと思うんですけど、so I'll start by this question. So relationship, it's they look very differently from like culture to culture. You're from America, and I'm Japanese. I'm from Japan.
Right.
So I want to ask you about like marriage and friendship. And the communication style in like relationship, like how they're different in these, especially in these cultures.
Right.
So I want to start, like we want to start by talking about marriage.
All right.
Yeah.
So I know that young people always want to sort of undo the mistakes of past generations, but the truth is that what is traditional, people grow up seeing their traditions as their parents, as their grandparents, as TV shows and movies show the traditions being practiced. And the tradition in Japan is that marriage is instrumental, which means you have a good marriage if it makes a secure household that brings in a lot of money, and if it raises your status in the community. And a lot of young adults today say, no, I don't want to marry a good provider. I want to marry someone who I feel happy when I'm with. But there's still pressure. One of the studies we talked about in my class, Japanese married couples who agreed that they were going to have a modern marriage, not a traditional one, they wound up much less satisfied, much more frustrated. They would agree that they were going to split up the work in the house, and then they didn't, because everybody around them just assumed that the wife should keep the house and look after the children, and the husband should go out to work and be a salaryman and never see his family. And that pressure made it very difficult to be married. We talked also about the examples in the Bible, 2 examples, Hosea from the Old Testament, and how God commanded him to marry a prostitute. And then after she was not faithful and broke the marriage vows and ran away from him and became a prostitute again, he went and found her being sold as a slave, and he bought her and took her home and restored her. And all of that was to show God's love for Israel. And then in the New Testament, Jesus referring to himself as the bridegroom, and then Paul writing repeatedly about the church being Christ's bride. And so what we talked about was the Christian ideal of marriage that influences the traditions in the West is that you, when you marry another person, are partnering with God to sanctify that person. So you're going to see that person at their worst. And it's not measured. A marriage is not measured in how much you enjoy it. And it's not measured in necessarily how wealthy and successful you see yourself as. There's a line that Timothy Keller loves to use, that when you're looking for a person to marry, you shouldn't be looking for a sculpture. You should look for a promising piece of marble, and you should see who they're going to be, not necessarily who they are today. So those are my basic thoughts about marriage.
そうですね。なんかその日本だけじゃなくて、こう若い人たちが結婚について考えるときに、そのさらにこう上の世代とか、自分が親とかその祖父母を通して見てきた結婚の概念のこう考えると思うんですけど、日本の場合はこうね、なんかこうお金がある人とかこう結婚して、でそのね結婚することによって ってなんかこの家族がもっと豊かにその経済的に豊かになったりとかそのコミュニティの中で地位が上がったりとかっていうのが、伝統的になんかそれ、いいねみたいな感じで思われてたと思うんですけど、なんかそれを若い世代の人たちはなんかそういうなんかために結婚はしたくないっていうふうに思っていて、でもなんかその同時にその社会の、上の世代の人とかからの考え方とかのプレッシャーがありますよね。なんか男性の方がもっと一生懸命働くべきで、女性は家にいて、家事をしてもっと家庭のことを守るべきみたいな考え方があって、でなんかねカップルとして結婚をする中でもっと平等でいたいみたいな感覚があるんだけど、でもその社会的なプレッシャーとかがあって、結婚がうまくいかないみたいなのがあったりとかして、でもその聖書の中で書かれているその結婚っていうことについて今お話ししてくれたと思うんですけど、ホセアっていう、人物が旧約聖書の中に書かれていて、彼はその神様の言葉によって、売春婦と結婚しなさいって言われるんですよね。でそれ結婚したんだけど、なんかその彼女はなんかまたそのホセアを去っていってしまって、でなんかその結果その奴隷として売られてしまうっていうね流れになっていくんですよ。でそれをホセアが見て、なんかもう一度その奴隷として売られてしまいそうなその彼女を買い戻すみたいなことがストーリーがあって、でそれは神様のそのイスラエルという神様が選んだ国であるイスラエルに対するその愛の深さを示してるんですけど、新約聖書には、イエス様が新郎というかこの、クリスチャン、教会というねクリスチャンたちの集まる場所というか、その教会というコミュニティに対してイエス様はなんか新郎としてその結婚する相手みたいなことをね聖書の中の新約聖書では概念としてあるんですけど、なんかそういう聖書の教えというか、概念の中から西洋的なその結婚観っていうのがもっと相手をこの結婚っていうのはただなんかその結婚生活楽しいっていうだけじゃなくて、なんか相手のすごいもうね落ち込んでる姿とかもう一番ね最悪な姿を見ても、それでもなんかお互いが成果し合う、なんかお互いにその神様の似姿になっていく、このイエス様の清さに預かっていくっていうプロセスの中で結婚が用いられるっていう風に考えているっていうことを今教えてくださったんですけど、はい、marriageね、結構ね今その結婚観っていうのもすごくいろんな国によっても違うと思うし、なんか世代によっても違うと思うんですけど、Do you have any idea of how younger generation have different opinions for marriage in Japan and America? Do people still want to get married in America? Do you also get comments from Japanese students about marriage?
I have seen the reports when the Japanese government and sometimes researchers, they'll poll Japanese young adults, what is the likelihood that you'll get married? And there's a larger and larger percent saying, I intend never to get married.
結婚したくない人が増えてる。
In the United States, the age of getting married has gone up. And there's slow growth in the segment of the population that says, I'm single and I'm happy being single, and because I like being single, I plan not to change that. But there aren't that many people who will say to people collecting data, I don't like the idea of being married, I don't ever want to be married. That's not very big in the United States.
Where do you think this idea from? Why do people get this idea of I don't want to get married?
Oh, that's a long conversation. I kind of gather that much of it in Japan is economic insecurity, that there's such a deeply rooted tradition that once a company would hire you, they'd keep you on forever, the salary they paid you was good enough to live on, and you wouldn't be laid off. And more recently in Japan, you can be hired, you don't have as much job security, it's much more expensive to raise a family, and people find themselves in terrible situations trying to provide for their children. And children who live through that, they reach young adulthood and they say, I don't want that. I can earn enough to provide for myself, but I'm not going to put myself or children through that kind of upbringing. In the United States, I think it's more that there's a long conversation we could have about how the ability to be patient and persistent in a relationship has been thinned out and hollowed out. It's very popular these days to repeat the slogan, cut toxic people out of your life. There are more and more young adults who are going no contact with their parents. And it's all very troubling.
Even with their parents.
Even with their parents. Yeah.
なるほど。なんか日本ではね結婚、日本もアメリカでもなんか結婚したくないっていう人自体が増えていて、日本では結構その経済的な部分で心配があったりとかして、そのね雇用の会社にずっと永年雇用されるわけじゃなくて、お金もなんか給料もなかなか上がらなくて、で自分を養うので精一杯なのに自分の子供とか家庭を持って家族を養うっていうのができるのかっていう心配がある一方、アメリカではなんか結構そのね関係性の中で難しいことがあった時にそれにちょっと耐えるというか忍耐してなんかその状況を改善しようとするなんて言うんだろうそういうね頑張ろうとするというかそういう状況の中でもちょっと忍耐するみたいなのがちょっとだんだんなくなってきているみたいなことらしいですけど、そうですね。Yeah, so marriage is very important thing to discuss. Also, as younger generation, friendship is very, very important.
Right.
So maybe university students, they're always surrounded by friends. How friendship looks differently in Japan and America. I'm sure it's pretty different.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
There's a researcher at Hokkaido University named Masaki Yuki, and he collaborates with another researcher in the United States, Joanna Shug. And their work they call relational mobility, and it's based on one real simple idea. In Japan, commonly people report that they make their friends when they're young, and as they get older, it's almost impossible to make new friends. In the United States, it's easy to make new friends, but you also move in and out of friendships, and friends grow apart, and friends just kind of let the friendship fade out. That's very common. So the United States is high relational mobility, and Japan is low relational mobility, and that has big effects in how people communicate.
はい、ちょっとだけ説明するとそのrelational mobility っていう言葉を使ってくれたんですけど、日本語で言うとしたら関係流動性、それでも分かんないと思うんですけど難しい言葉だと思うんですけど、その関係流動性っていうのは何かっていうと、なんかその関係流動性が低い、つまり日本のような場所ではずっと同じ人と付き合っていくっていう感覚があって、で大人になってから新しい友達は作りにくい。でもアメリカではその関係流動性が高い、流動しやすいので年をとっても新しい友達とかができやすい文化があるっていうことなんですけど、はい。So yeah, I think I heard in school or something, after you get retired from work, in Japan, it's difficult to make friends, new friends, because the friends you have is from a company you've worked for, or old friend from high school or university. But I think making new friends takes a lot of energy, and you kind of scared. You're scared to go to new places and new communities. Yeah, but America, it's different, right? You can easily make friends.
Right.
I also wanted to ask you, so in Japan, it's not normal to talk to strangers.
Right.
But
Yes.
I heard in America, it's very normal. So to talk to strangers.
Sure.
Yeah, why is it so different?
This is one of the things I talked about in my Christian influences on communication, and I said there's a major influence out of biblical teaching and Christianity, because Jesus gave his followers the Great Commission. So in the United States, you're raised with the belief that one of the best things you can do is to walk up to a complete stranger and talk to them about right and wrong and the meaning of life. And if you talk to lots of strangers and introduce lots of them to the gospel, you're doing a wonderful thing. And so they learn from the time they're young, talking to strangers is good. And talking to strangers about the most important and sensitive things pleases God. And something that comes out of the relational mobility research we've known for a long time, back to the 1960s, Japanese people are much less likely to do what we call self-disclose, to talk about things that may be embarrassing or painful. In large part, that's because of low relational mobility. If you repeatedly made your friends uncomfortable, they might still feel an obligation or a duty to you, but they might not feel close to you anymore. Whereas it's upside down in the United States. If you don't talk about things that are painful or that you're struggling with, they feel like the relationship isn't close. Like, why don't you ever tell me about things that matter to you?
なるほど。なんか日本では確かにこう自分のことを話すのってすごいなんか難しくて、なんかすごい仲いい友達の中でも深いことを話す人ってすごい限られてて、なんかもしくはこうほぼいない、なんか深いことを話せる人がほぼいないっていう状況があると思うんですけど、それが多分ね、なんか寂しさとかにつながったりとかもするのかなとか思って、でもアメリカ人はそういうのすごい上手なんですよ。なんか自分のことを話すのがすごく上手。なんか私もアメリカ人の友達とかと喋ってる時になんかこういう風になんか何でも話すんだなとか言ってちょっと感心したりとかするんですけど、はい。So like I also feel like as Japanese, it's very difficult to like talk about myself, like especially painful things, painful past. But like when I whenever I talk to Americans, like they're very good at like expressing themselves, talking about themselves. So I like feel like, oh wow, that's how like you talk about these things. I'm learning.
And there are two other things that come out of Christian discipline that I also said were Christian influences on this exact behavior. And that is, first of all, the belief that hiding your sin out of shame. I mean, the first thing Adam and Eve did after the fall was realize they were naked and put on fig leaves. And the one thing that we can be sure of when God closes the books on history and makes all things new again is we'll have nothing to be ashamed of. And so in every Christian tradition, there's some form of confess your sins to one another. And then on top of that, when you spread the gospel, you give your testimony. And I've had so many people tell me the story of how they were drug addicted, how they committed crimes and went to prison, because that's what God rescued them from. So Christians disclose those things because we're all sinners. It makes it so safe to talk about the things that would be embarrassing.
確かになんかそのキリスト教の中で罪っていう概念があるんですけど、でもそのイエス様を信じたらその罪をもう恥じることなくて、もう本当に許されているっていうね考え方が聖書の中にあって、だからなんか特にクリスチャンの人とかは自分のなんか恥ずかしいこと、罪とかなんか話すことは恥ずかしいことじゃない、なんかそれはもうなんかこう神様によって解決されているし解決されるっていう考え方があるから結構話しやすいっていう風に言ってくれましたね。確かに。Yeah, that's a very like good point. Like, yeah, like it's very like scary to like share about your shame, your like dark past, but like yeah, like you know that you're renewed, like you're okay because you're forgiven by God. So yeah, that's why you can share.
And that's the thing I tried to repeat so many times in this class I taught. God loves you perfectly, better than any love, better than your parents, better than your grandparents, better than your best friend. And He knows all the things that you're ashamed of, and He knows all the things you're terrified someone might find out. He knows all of it, and He loves you perfectly.
Right. そうですね。神様が完全にその罪もこう知っていて愛してくれているっていうことがすごく大きな慰めになると思います。Yeah, that has been also a big comfort to me. So yeah. そうですね。福音のねこう こう聖書に書かれているそれが福音なんですけど、こう自分たちが罪人だけど神様に完全に許されているっていうことですね。Yeah, so it's in the Bible, right? Like we're sinners, but like we are completely forgiven by God. So yeah, like we don't need to be like afraid anymore. Yeah, we're accepted, we're loved by God. Yeah, ね。そうなんかちょっと今話せたと思うんですけど、yeah, so like relationship, like the Bible talks a lot about relationship, like how you should like yeah, like talk to people, like communicate with people, like with love, like the commandment you need to follow. It's like to love God, to love your neighbors. そうなんか神様を愛してね、こう隣人を愛することが聖書の中ですごく大事な概念だと思うんですけど、はい、なんかそう Japanese people are like most of us are not familiar with like Christianity or what the Bible teaches about relationship and communication. Do you have any like practical like comments for Japanese younger generation about relationship, like to think about relationship?
I have two, and I think they're kind of close to each other. One of them is what the Bible teaches is we have one God, but that one God, and this confuses everybody, but if you keep studying and thinking and learning about it, you can become comfortable with it. One God with three persons, the Father, the Son, the Spirit.
三位一体ですね。
And the Bible also teaches that even before they created the world, they loved each other, they were delighted with each other, and they were always pointing out how wonderful the other two were. And so, the lesson that I teach my own students about how to communicate, look to the people around you and see how lovable they are and make that your focus. And among the things that does, you remember individual collective, that transcends the individual collective because life is not about you and it's not about the group. It's about how uniquely precious and beautiful everybody is. And it also explains why the Bible commands us to worship God. It's not because he's insecure and needs to be complimented. It's because that's where the joy is in finding what's lovable in other people and celebrating it. So that's lesson number one.
めちゃめちゃいいアドバイスをシェアしてくれたんですけど、ね、神様はその三位一体という言葉でこう言われたりとかしますけど、神様は唯一の神なんだけど3つの人格があって、でそれぞれでお互いそのね3つの人格同士がお互いをすごく尊重し合って愛がある、その中に愛があって、でその関係性の中に愛があるっていう状態のその神が私たちをこう愛してくださっているっていう。でそうですね、だから私たちもその神様っていう存在をこう知るときにその愛を体験することもできるし、なんかもうねこう神様が私たちのこうフォーカスになるので、別に自分がなんかどういうふうに認められるかとか、そのグループがどういうふうに認められているかとか愛されているかとかじゃなくて、そういうなんかそのね私たちがどれだけ神様にユニークに作られて、どれだけこうスペシャルな存在なのかっていうことをなんか知るときにすごく解放されるというか、すごく自由にされるっていうのがあると思いますけど、はい、ちょっと私はうまくサマリーできてるかわからないんですけど、でも本当に素晴らしいなんかアドバイスだなと思います。はい、日本人にとっても。Yeah, so thank you for sharing. Yeah, like it was a great advice for like me too, personally. Yeah, like it's not about me, it's not about the group, it's about the praising God and like being loved and to love God. So that's how I'm uniquely created.That's the purpose of my life. So thank you for like that reminder. Cool. Thank you so much. Hi.
Can I give you the one other one?
Sure.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, you're good.
Yeah.
This one's always my students' favorite. They always love this one the best. You and I were talking and you majored in psychology.
Yeah, right.
So this guideline comes from the idea of attribution. That we see other people behave, we don't know the reasons, so we make up reasons. If someone shows up to a meeting late, you might say, well, they're disorganized, and that's your attribution. The lesson is when someone behaves in a way that makes a problem for you, think of the different reasons they might have behaved that way. Pick the one that's the easiest to forgive and believe that that's the one and forgive them. The example I give my students, you're out driving and someone cuts you off in traffic. You could get angry because they're a sloppy driver and probably playing on their phone. Or you might say to yourself, they might be rushing to the side of a family member in the hospital. And if that's why they cut me off, I would forgive them instantly. So, forgive them. Assume that's the reason and forgive them. That's the other guideline that I teach that's biblical in nature. Figure out the most forgivable reason, assume that's the reason, and forgive them.
ね、許しってすごく大事なコンセプトとしてこう聖書に出てくると思うんですけど、ね、人間っていつもこう他の人の行動をなんか推測するんですよね。勝手にこうなんか仮説を作り出して、こうだからこうなったんだっていう風に捉えるんですけど、でもなんかその仮説が間違ってるかもしれないですよね。だからなんかこの人がなんかめっちゃこの人の行動でイライラするっていうのがあったとしたら、なんかねこの許せる理由っていうのをなんか見つけるっていうことが具体的なアドバイスとして今ドイル先生が言ってくれたんですけど、こういう理由でこの人を許せるなっていうところを見つけましょう。本当に関係性の中でこう、ね、自分が高慢になることってできちゃうと思うんですけど、相手のことを許して本当にこう平等に見るというかね、なんかそういうことすごく大事だと思います。Yeah, thank you. Yeah, do you have any more things to say?
We're good.
Yeah, okay. はい、じゃあ今回のエピソードはこれで終わりなんですけど、次回エピソード3はですね、キリスト教と現代社会ということでですね、キリスト教がどういうふうに今の私たちの社会に影響してきたのかしているのかっていうことを話していきたいと思います。So thank you for this episode. はい、また次のエピソードでお会いしましょう。またね。